Hey there, it's Pastor Vern with the daily update for today. Today is May 7th. It's a Thursday, 2020. All right. I got a couple announcements to make for you as we get started today. The first one is we've had consulted with all the church councils, and we will not probably be having any worship in May in our churches. It'll continue online. We're doing this as a cautious. The COVID cases are rising in the state, and a few popping up in our local area, and so with the strict limitations on social distancing and cleaning and disinfecting and not singing and not using hymnals, stuff like that during the worship. We've decided that for the month of May anyway, we'll be looking at not having worship in person. We'll be looking in the middle of the month. We're going to have meetings again to see how we are shaping up. If we do start having worship in person, we are going to have to get some supplies in and set up some things to guide people in the appropriate manner to fit the guidelines. So more on that as it becomes available. So continue to sign in and check these out, the dailies out, and also the weekend worship. This week we're going to have we'll have our worship downloaded on Saturday evening as usual. I hope Saturday evening downloads are a little slow, but we got to kind of work with that. In the next 2 days, we're going to do a 2-day crash course on salvation. Now, I'm going to probably hit Trinity next week, but it takes a little time to prepare that, and I'm not real comfortable with the way I have that set up yet. So we're going to talk a little bit about salvation. Now, of course, this is a huge topic in the Christian community because that's a lot of what we're about. But I'm going to give you just some of the basics, kind of a crash course a little bit that would maybe answer a few of the questions that you may have. Basically, salvation comes from a Latin word, like a lot of our words come Latin and Greek in our biblical history, and it has to do with to make whole or complete again. That is kind of that's the definition they use, and the biblical meaning, of course, is to rescue us from danger and or death. And that's what we talk about when we talk about salvation. And we've had two kinds of salvation we see in the Bible, and one is from danger. Oftentimes, especially in the Old Testament, we see where God had intervened for his people, and salvation was theirs from their enemies. And of course, after the coming of Jesus and his sacrifice, we talk about our salvation as conquering death, that even though our physical bodies die and are no longer viable, our spirit, our soul, our essence, whatever you want to call it, continues on and is welcomed home to be with Jesus and with God, assuming that we have opened our hearts to that. And one of the things that we want to talk about is salvation. The work of salvation is already completed. Christ completed that during his lifetime. He came to this earth and he lived our lives, understand our scenarios to a large degree, the human condition, I guess you would call it. And he himself experienced that as only someone who lives the life can experience it. And so the work of being saved was his work of going through understanding the human condition, dying on the cross and being raised again, and then ascending to heaven. So the work of salvation has already been completed. And, we're going to have to talk about tomorrow the for and why, or the for and from what we're being rescued from. Remember, it's made whole, complete, to be rescued from something. But today we're going to talk a little bit about the how. we have a lot of discussion about that in the Christian culture, and there's different ideas of how that really works. Um, but the work is done, and then we talk about what things we need to do in order to be rescued, come through salvation. And what we have a problem with here is we tend to confuse that with the fruits of the Spirit. We've talked about the fruits of the Spirit a while back, about those things that are generated by our faith, that we have received. If we receive God's grace, we become people who are willing to do certain things as a second nature for our fellow man and for the world in general. But it might be easier to talk about how we're not rescued. We aren't saved because we have a lot of knowledge, and especially head knowledge about the scriptures. That's not what saves us. One of the aspects we have with that is that we have people who have been told about Christ. We have people who have been shared very limitedly, a very limited amount of the scriptures because of their circumstances, but yet their faith has grown. They have gotten it from word of mouth. And so that's really not part of it's part of the process, but it's not one of the ways that we consider ourselves rescued. We're not saved by being just good people, by the conscience of being someone who is in society in a way that is sharing with others and giving of ourselves. That's part of the fruit of the Spirit. Once again, that's part of the work that the Spirit does within us after we receive God's grace. We aren't saved necessarily by believing the right things. There's a lot of different different groups in Christianity that have some slightly different beliefs. One of the things that's interesting about Christianity, it is the only organized religion in the world that every branch came together at one point and decided on a set of creeds that we would all live by. So that's not really it either. We aren't saved because we're right about the issues of today, that we're more righteous than the next person on our thinking. And we're not saved by just being nice and loving people. We are saved by Jesus Christ. We are saved by the work of salvation that he did, that we talked about earlier. And that is the faith that is put into us by God. That's what truly is our salvation. When we talk about receiving the Holy Spirit and God's grace, that is put into us by God. And that's what our salvation is about. The work is done. We just have to take it in our hearts and accept the fact that the sacrifices have been made, and we are people who have been redeemed. The rest of those things we talked about are fruits of the Spirit. They're important to our faith, but they're not really the key to salvation. All right. Well, that's enough of that today. You can look up more of that stuff for yourself, and you may disagree with me on some of those points, and that's okay, because that's a little bit of our diversity in our Christian faith. One of the great things we know about Jesus, even during his life, is even though he approached everybody in a very compassionate, sympathetic manner, he did approach people in different ways. He appeared to them differently. He granted them different types of relationships, and so we don't have to all be exactly on the same page in order to receive salvation. As long as we've allowed Jesus to do the work and we've let God put that in our hearts. Okay, tomorrow we're going to talk about Christ rescued us from and for. Why did this even happen, and what are we really rescued from? And so tune in tomorrow again for that. Once again, we won't have any in-person worship in May. We're hoping down the road we can get that going. For those of you who may have people in your household that are interested in confirmation, especially those youth that are that will be going into the 7th grade or older next year, who has not received has not gone through confirmation yet, we're going to be working on some contact information for you to kind of see what you guys are thinking about getting this started. We've got a few options. And so if I know several of you, but if you hear this and want to message me just to say, yeah, I've got somebody in my household that's interested in confirmation, so I get a comprehensive list, that would be great. Great seeing you again today. We're one day closer to being together again, and we'll check in with you again tomorrow. Blessings, everyone.